Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, Simple Measures, Big Results, How to Collect, Analyze, and Share Program Impact Data. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items, so all callers will be muted. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat box that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. If you have to drop off early or if you want to watch the webinar again, we will be hosting the webinar on our website at TechSoup.org/community/events-webinars. We'll also be sending an email with the presentation, the recording, and any relevant links that we talk about today. If you're on social media, feel free to give us a tweet at TechSoup using hashtag TSWebinars. But like I said earlier, we'll be using the chat box that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. So just a little bit about TechSoup. We are located in 236 countries and territories. We serve over 1 million nonprofits offering donated or discounted technology. We partner with several technology companies like Adobe, Intuit, Microsoft, Symantec, and several others that you see here to make our mission possible. If you're interested in finding out if your company is eligible, I will be sending out a link where you can find out if your organization can get product donations. In addition to product donations and discounts, we also offer tech consulting, technology services, trainings, apps for change, information and resources, and then also a place for just information and resources. So before I make introductions, I just want to make sure you guys can hear me okay. So if you don't mind using the chat box and just typing in where you're calling in from, and I'll read a few of them out just to make sure the sound is okay. All right, so we have Boston, Green Bay, Wisconsin, Ron from Atlanta, Suzanne from New Hampshire, Atlanta, Rock Island, Illinois. Okay, perfect. So you guys can hear me just fine. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make introductions. So my name is Seema Tucker, and I am the Senior Manager of Content here at TechSoup. I also have with me Zareen Kazi, who is going to be helping on the back end. And we have today's presenters. So we have Mike Yeaton, who's the Chief Strategy Officer, and he is the Chief Strategy Officer for Empire Health Foundation and also a data and innovation consultant for TechSoup. His experience includes implementing measurement frameworks for multiple large grant portfolios. We have Neetu Rohit, who's the Digital Marketing Analyst at TechSoup, and she holds an MS in Computer and Information System Security from the University of Plymouth. And we also have Katya Williams, who is the Impact Data Intern here at TechSoup, and she's working on a range of data-related projects. She recently graduated from UC Berkeley with a major in data science and a minor in global poverty. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Mike.
Thanks, Seema. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today to the webinar, and also to thank my two co-presenters here, Neetu Rohit and Katya Williams. And I'll just say that it's a pleasure to just work with two such remarkable women data scientists, both of whom's technical chops exceed my own. So when it comes to outcomes and evaluation, we often feel like we face a kind of Sophie's choice. On the one hand, we can hire a data scientist at great expense. On the other hand, we can count marbles in a jar. But I think Pareto told us a long time ago that in any endeavor, 80% of the results can come from 20% of our effort. And what I'm going to share with you today is a model that where a little bit of rigor around outcomes and evaluation I think can take us a long way in terms of credibly telling our story. So the outline for today is as follows. First, I'm going to go talk a little bit about traditional evaluation, and then I'm going to kind of leap into the model as we've approached at Empire Health, which involves proxy measures, a basic analysis, dynamic dashboarding using Power BI. And following that, Neetu's actually going to take you through and show you how easy it is to build dashboards in Power BI. And finally, at the end, we're going to close with a special offer for the hardy souls who make it to the end of the webinar. So whenever we talk about traditional evaluation, we're typically trying to prove that something some program A or some treatment A influences outcome B. So for example, what's the relationship between a health education program and smoking on the other? Now, in order to quote-unquote prove that, we need to have a control group for comparison. So you would randomly divide your subjects ideally into two groups, one of whom gets the treatment, one of whom doesn't, and then you compare the results. But in practice, in doing these type of work with human subjects, there's quite a lot of overhead involved. You might have to have data sharing agreements with different agencies, and any experiment involving human subjects may very well and most likely will be subject to review by the Incident Review Board. In addition, in my own experience with formal evaluations for nonprofit programs, there are often many outcome measures, including both outcomes for the subjects but also process measures. As next is an issue that often these evaluation processes are really only one time. We often hear evaluation plan, which has a start and an end date, and then a report is delivered only at the end or as you near the end of the project. And finally, they have to be provided often by third-party evaluators, be that a consultant or an academic partner, and as a result, they're quite costly. And based on all the complexity and cost that I've just sort of outlined for you, my own experience is these are normally only done when they're driven by funders. But to test that assumption and to kind of engage you guys in a quick poll, I'd like to find out from you, using this definition of traditional evaluation, what % of your programs do you do evaluation for? If you could pop the poll.
All right, you guys should be seeing a poll now.
So,
Are you guys are you able to see the results?
okay. So this is pretty consistent with what I expect, which is because of the cost and complexity, it's sometimes done, but it's by no means is it the norm. I think most nonprofits find the overhead and the challenge of doing this pretty daunting, and for good reason. So that's not surprising. So given that, I actually want to talk first about an example in our own work where we actually have done a traditional evaluation, and that's a program called Rising Strong. And Rising Strong is a program we launched in Washington State in 2017, which is designed to help families at risk of child removal due to parental substance use or alcohol use disorder. Instead of the children being removed, this program takes the whole family into safe housing, provides substance and mental health services for the parents, as well as just wraparound services including job placement, life skills. It's a very powerful model and has had great results in Oregon and California. And it can serve up to 30 families. So we launched this program in 2017, and if you're curious about more, there's a nice write-up in the Seattle Times in April. However, and I would say the other good news about this program was in 2017, the year we launched, we were also really fortunate enough to win a $3 million federal grant from SAMHSA to provide us with 5 years of operating funding. But as we know, these types of grants can often come with a pretty stiff evaluation requirements. In our case, the grant required us to allocate 20% of the grant, $600,000 for evaluation. We hired a university research team, and we're now midway through a 5-year study of 100 families. It also required us to have a matched comparison group, meaning we needed to get a data sharing agreement with the Child Welfare Department, which I'm sure you can appreciate is not an easy thing. And the report itself has 35 or more outcome measures are being looked at. So it's a fairly complex undertaking. But I have to say, although I'm really grateful for this grant and that this provides stability for this program, I have to wonder about the value of all this data being collected and analysis being done. And to illustrate that, I'll say we are part of a cohort of 10 grantees. So all of us are spending this money independently on evaluations. Secondly, this is actually the fourth round of these grants that the SAMHSA has issued. So millions and millions of dollars have been spent on these on the evaluation portion of these projects over time. And one big question for me, which I'll express in a second, is what happens if things change in that program? It's one thing to test a drug molecule, but it's quite another when you're talking about programs that are very dependent on the people who are delivering it and even the physical environment. So for example, in year 3 of this program, which we're in now, we actually had a leadership change, which we think will have a very good effect. But I think this shift in leadership there will certainly influence the future success and course of the program. So I appreciate the need for these kinds of evaluation, but I sometimes question whether they're really applicable to the kind of human services that we actually deliver day to day. So what are the challenges with traditional evaluation? Well, obviously cost. Hundreds of thousands can go into millions of dollars. Getting the data, I talked about that. having to have data sharing agreements, or having to have people opt into sharing very intimate details of their lives. Also, the one-time results at the end. I mean, it's funny to think about a business like, say, an internet business that would say, okay, we're going to study how this works for our customers, and in 5 years we'll get the data and then make a decision about what to do next. So this whole notion of just this kind of one-time flow of data, it's not the way that I like to think about how to manage programs or improvement. Another point I want to make about this is it's really important to respect the historical context. Often for us as a health foundation, we're working with very vulnerable or marginalized communities. And to illustrate this, I really love this Native American art, ledger art on the right, which was a form of art that was popularized in the early part of the 20th century. And at this time, the only source of paper for these Native American artists was often the accounting sheet of these white invaders. And what I love is this juxtaposition of the art with the ledger, which I think is just a good reminder that we all should keep in mind, which is empirical systems have often been used as tools of oppression on marginalized communities. And then the last thing I'll just ask is the replicability of results. I think that it's one thing to study a drug. That molecule will never change. It's another to talk about human services programs. And I think we've all had the experience that the person who's delivering that program probably makes a bigger difference in the outcomes than the specific program model, or whether that was proved in another community with a completely different team. So I just say I think we have to look at this. It's important to do it sometimes, but I also think we have to hold those results lightly. So if not that, then what's the alternative? Well, for most of our programs, we've adopted a model which involves basically three things. First, using proxy measures, which are simpler to collect but are still valid. Second is to do a basic analysis to control for our own biases. And third is to use dynamic dashboarding so we can turn those insights and that data into action. So to start with this, I'm going to step through this. So what is a proxy measure? Well, a proxy is essentially just substituting something we can measure for something we can't. And it's important that if we select a proxy, that proxy has proven relationships to the outcomes we're seeking, and I'll talk about specifics in a second. For us, it's also important that this proxy measure is lightweight and low cost, because we don't want to just collect data one time. We want to collect data about program impact forever, and essentially, so that it can support the ongoing monitoring of the changes. And as an example of what potential proxy, I'll share a study here on the right. So this is a graph of that the Purdue University did recently as part of a study. And they used the Gallup poll data, which is, I think, 1.7 million people. Gallup is often used as a data source because they simply have so much data about people around the world. And what they looked at was the relationship between self-reported well-being, their mean life satisfaction, and income level. And they found something interesting, which is that the well-being rises in correlating or rises in proportion to income up to $95,000, after which it declines. So in theory, you could use income as a proxy. It's not what we do, but I'm suggesting this as an illustration that you could use income as a proxy for life satisfaction, at least up until $95,000. So as an example of how you might do a proxy. So now I'm going to talk about the specific example that we did as a health foundation. So we have a portfolio of about a dozen programs, plus or minus, they come and go, of programs to improve the health and well-being of seniors in our community. And these programs are quite diverse, both in terms of the program model. Some use technology, some are face-to-face coaching, some are run through pharmacies, a whole range of different program models, and a whole variety of community partners ranging from hospital providers to nonprofits to even tribes that we work with. And so we knew that we couldn't do traditional evaluation on this. So what measure would we choose? What proxy? So we selected a model called PAM, which stands for Patient Activation Measure. And this is a 10 or 13 question survey that was developed at the University of Oregon and is now licensed by a company called Insignia in Portland. And what PAM measures is one's confidence to manage your own health. So it's not a direct measure of your health. We don't look at blood sugar, heart rate, or any other indices like that. We simply ask them, how confident do you feel about managing your own health? And the results of that are scored in a system where the higher the activation level, the better in terms of the patient activation. It's relatively inexpensive. It costs $1 per client. However, that $1 per client also includes the data collection platform. So working with this model, our partners out in the communities can actually collect the data and de-identify it and submit it to us, so we will never touch or see the individual data. We can be very sensitive to that. It's also very low overhead to administer. You're not asking extremely personal details. You're really asking them just about, do you feel confident in talking to your doctor about your health concerns, questions like that. And the program staff can actually administer the survey. So you don't have to have an outside evaluator. You can, with minimal training, anybody who's working in the community can administer this survey. And as a result, it can be collected frequently. So our model, which we use with all our partners, is to collect client surveys from every participating client every 3 months, with open-ended. So I want to point out that a measure can be lightweight. Oh, sorry, I want to say on the right side here, so it's fine if it's lightweight, but the real question, of course, is does it actually correlate? Does it actually relate to the outcomes you seek? And on the right side here, you see these are quotes out of research papers that show the strong relationship between improving PAM scores and improving health. And so the great thing about using a proxy like this is we don't actually have to prove that that an improvement in PAM scores means better health. Others have already done that. All we have to do is go out and collect this relatively lightweight measure. Now, when we first did PAM, I thought 10 questions was pretty good. We're getting pretty lean. But more as I've looked at this, I think you can actually even go lighter than that. And some of you, excuse me, some of you may be familiar with the BRFIS survey, which is an annual survey of 400,000 adults in the U.S. To try to get a profile of their health. Now, there are about 100 questions on that survey, but what's interesting is the very first question is what's called a single self-reported health question. And it simply says, would you say that in general your health is, and it gives you a scale essentially of 1 to 5, or you can opt out of the question. Now, what's interesting is that seems so simple, but it turns out that that one question has very high relationship, very high association with a whole range of health outcomes, including mortality, managing chronic conditions, use of health services, etc. So think about that for a second. One question which can be used as a proxy for that person's overall health. And so for us, this really opens up interesting possibilities that we're exploring. There are about 1 million members in our total area of service. And it's not inconceivable that if we wanted to, we could survey 100,000 people with this model. So we could really develop a big, rich array of data here. In addition, because this survey is administered through BRFIS, we can actually compare the results we see in communities that we're serving or programs that we're serving with the broader outcomes in those communities as well. So what I would say is that it's definitely my conclusion that the lighter the measure, assuming it's still empirically valid, the more likely you're going to have data and the more you'll be able to collect and the more you'll be able to do with it. Okay, so let's assume that you've figured a good proxy, ideally even a single question that is empirically sound but easy to collect and represents the outcome you're seeking. So what about the analysis? Now, I said at the beginning, it's not no rigor analysis, but it's light rigor analysis. And to illustrate the need for a little bit of rigor, I want to do another poll real quick. So I want you to just give your answer to this question. So there's a certain town served by 2 hospitals. And one is larger, about 45 babies each day are born there. And in the smaller hospital, about 15 babies are born each day. And of course, about 50% of all babies born are girls. However, the exact percentage, as we would expect, varies from day to day. Sometimes it's higher than 50%, sometimes lower. So here's the question. For a period of 1 year, each hospital recorded the days on which more than 60% of the babies born were girls. Which hospital do you think recorded more such days? Is it the larger hospital, the smaller hospital, or about the same? So please respond to that poll, if that makes sense. Just prompt me when I should go to results. Oh, I see results. Oh yeah, we've got a nice one. Okay. We've got a nice level of data here. Okay. So a small group thought the larger hospital, good on you. A larger group thought the smaller hospital. but the most of you felt they would be close together. And the answer is the smaller hospital. And the reason is because that hospital delivers only a third as many babies, the variance in that smaller sample is going to be higher than for the larger hospital. So the smaller the sample, the higher the variance. And to illustrate this, I'm actually going to show you our actual PAM data, so the scores that we talked about before. And so what I see on the left here is the count of the number of PAM surveys that we've conducted by the round of the program. I mentioned each round is 3 months long, so we survey our clients every 3 months. Now you'll notice, and this is not uncommon, I'm sure you guys have seen this in your own data, that the number of scores declines round by round. And there's a number of reasons for that. Every new client will start at 0. So every new program and every new client will start at round 0. That's their intake round. And then they'll proceed for as long as that program lasts or as long as they participate in the program. But of course, some programs end. Some are only designed to go for 3 rounds. And some clients will, of course, leave the program for one reason or another. So we see the number of data points that we have declining over time during the round by round throughout our data set. But looking on the right, I've now charted the average score. And so what you can see is when you're in the earlier rounds and you have a lot of data, the trend line is pretty clear. It's a pretty smooth upward trajectory. But as we get to these later rounds where the data is really small, we start seeing it zigzag all up and down. So the point here is this. The smaller the amount of data that you have, the less that data is likely to reflect the actual outcome of your program. So this is really fundamental, why averages typically don't work and why we need a little more rigor. Now, why do we get that so wrong? Why do we tend to overweight those small samples? And to explain this, I just want to point to the pioneering work of 2 Israeli psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who in the 70s in Israel founded basically the field of behavioral economics. And what's so interesting about their work is that they proved that not only do people think wrong, but that we think wrong in predictable ways. And one of the ways that we do it is that we tend to overvalue a small sample as being very representative of the overall population. So it's a fascinating thing that, it's not just that we make these mistakes, but that human beings, as a rule, make them consistently. And they also actually did this experiment on research psychologists who would have known the data and the math behind it, but they still fell into this trap. So we all do. And why do we do that? I think it's because we are first and foremost storytellers and not mathematicians. So when we see data, we can't help but build that story about it in our minds. Now we're going to take a little brief detour to explain why we have to do a little bit of necessary rigor. So on the left you see this story about Captain Cook and sauerkraut. And in the 1700s seafaring days, scurvy would kill about half the sailors on long voyages, which as we now know was caused by a deficiency of vitamin C. When Captain Cook set sail in 1768 on his epic journey, he brought along 3 tons of canned sauerkraut on the theory that that would help them combat scurvy. And he actually required his sailors to eat sauerkraut daily under threat of flogging. And the fact that they had to flog people to eat it tells you how bad canned sauerkraut that was 3 years old must have tasted in the 1700s. But the result was it effectively ended scurvy as a threat, and from that point forward became standard issue on all long sea voyages. So to go back to our A equals A demonstrating the relationship between A and B, Cook demonstrated that if you eat sauerkraut, you will not get scurvy. So now in our journey here, to get past the rocks of this small sample size bias that we all fall victim to, we need to take 2 small bites of math pie. And by this I mean we don't have to understand the math, but we at least have to get comfortable with 2 basic statistical concepts. The first one is correlation. And correlation, which is abbreviated as R because mathematicians are a cruel lot, is really a measure of the strength of the relationship between 2 variables. So in our case, we're looking at the strength of the relationship between the round of survey, indicating how long people have been in the program, and their PAM scores. Now, the great thing about correlation and why it's better than averages for most things is because it considers all the data you've collected, not just the last round like average change. It's a value ranging from -1 to +1, and for our case, we characterize correlation as follows. 0.5 to 1 is a strong correlation, 0.3 to 0.5 is moderate, and below 0.3 is weak, or it even could be an inverse or a negative correlation. So looking over on the right, you see an example of a study between hours studied, and exam score. So this is showing you that it has a very strong correlation of 0.87. So the more time spent studying, the better the outcome. I'll be sharing this with my son after this call. But really the key takeaway for you from this is that correlation, or abbreviated as R, measures the strength of the relationship, and the closer to 1, the better. Now, there's another concept that we have to tackle, because even with a strong correlation like this 0.87, we may be overvaluing a small sample. And we can actually see that's quite possible with just 6 data points in this particular graph. So the second concept we need to get comfortable with is significance. So where we said correlation measures the strength of the relationship, significance, again, conveniently abbreviated as P, measures the validity of the relationship. And this is a function both of the amount of data and the strength of the result. So a very strong correlation can be demonstrated with less data, because it's easier to see that that's a real change. If the change is smaller, then you're going to need a proportionally larger amount of data for that to be significant. And what significance very simply is, it measures the likelihood that the result we saw could occur by chance. So it's a control for that bias that we have to overvalue it. And a value of less than 0.05 says there's less than a 5% chance that our result could occur by random chance. And that, although it's still a pretty decent sized chance, it's considered, you can then say that your result is statistically significant, which is important, an important control. And just to illustrate how that might look, if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that the over-year change in employment population ratios by state from 2012 to 2013. So they're looking at the ratio in employment to population ratios. And they're not even telling you what the data is here. What they're telling you is where they have enough data and enough of an effect for it to be statistically significant. And in all the states in this data set, the only ones in purple are they saying that they can show you a statistically significant change. Now in these other states, the correlation may be strong or it may be weak. They're not telling you that because they're not sharing that result, because it's not defensible using their 5% test. So the takeaway from this slide is significance measures validity, and the closer to 0, the better. And this is how you control the tendency we have to overvalue small sample sizes. So in conclusion, this is the model I like to call right-sized evaluation. Choose a lightweight proxy measure which demonstrated relationship to the objectives you seek. And there are many choices out there. Second, collect data on a continuous basis. Analyze your correlation and significance in your outcome data. And although that seems intimidating, it can really be done with 1 line of code, and help is available. This is very much at the easy end of the statistics universe. And then share the results as much as possible to demonstrate impact and adjust your strategies. And I'll show you how we do that in a moment. Now, there's some limitations, of course. This is a simplified model, but we have found it to be very useful. It really fills our kind of 80-20 spot. We know we'll have to do traditional evaluation sometimes. We know sometimes we're just going to count stuff. But that middle should be bigger in terms of where we have empirically valid outcome data. But we can do it relatively low overhead. Second is, we're focused on outcomes, not on proving a causal relationship. But as I explained before, I have my doubts about how strong that proof is when it comes to a lot of the programs that we support anyway. So really, we're focused on the outcomes. And the last one I want to make is to a colleague of mine, Daisy Ozim, who pointed out at a recent seminar I was at that there is meaningful information about people and communities that can never be quantified, and that is the realm of art and narrative and music and other traditional means of expression. And last on this part, I just want to close with perhaps my favorite quote, which is, "All models are wrong, some are useful." Really, it doesn't matter what model you're using for evaluation. It's always going to be an approximation of reality. So try to find the sweet spot between the amount of effort you're getting and the insight that it provides. And so now I'm going to jump over and show you what our dashboard looks like. And then I'll turn it over to Neetu to actually show you how to build these. So this is a dashboard showing all our PAM data across all our programs. You can see we're up to 500 clients in our data set with 1,600 scores collected. Some of these have sunsetted or stopped running, or just they reached the end of their program model time. And I want to just highlight for you a couple of these programs. So up at the top here I see my R value, my correlation, and my P value, my significance. So to refresh, our target for R value is we're looking for a positive correlation of 0.3 or greater, and our target for P is less than 0.05, indicating less than a 5% chance the data is random. So let me just show you how a couple of these programs actually look. So this is program 1, which has a very healthy R value of 0.49, almost into the strong realm, and also an excellent p-value of which is below 0.00, indicating that it's very unlikely this is caused by random chance. And I think visually you can see this on the chart of the correlation there. So that's a really great program. But let's look at a couple of other cases. So this is program 2, and this was actually just a very short pilot that actually was shut down because it didn't have a lot of support in the community. But I want to point out an interesting thing. The R value here, the correlation is really strong at 0.44, but the p-value is way too high at 0.46, saying there's a 46% chance that this correlation is just a random luck. And if you look at the data here, you see there were 4 clients that came in, and 1 had a second survey, and that's it. So if you rely on averages for this kind of data set, you're just kidding yourself. There's no way this is a valid correlation. This is not enough of a sample. Looking at another one, let's pick one that has program 6, which has a low R and a low R and a low P. So this program has a 0.22 correlation, a positive correlation, but it's below our threshold. However, it is a statistically significant one, 2% chance of it being caused by random chance. So if you look at this, this also bears out in the visual. We can see that there's a fairly gentle but positive slope. So in this case, the data is sufficient, but the effect is not what we want. And finally, we can look at a program that has low P, low R. Low R and high P. So low correlation and high p-value, which is bad for significance. And here we go. We've got a lot of data. We've got 55 clients and 150 scores over 3 rounds. But what we're seeing here is a very weak correlation of only 0.07 and a very weak p-value of 39% due to randomness. And this is the point I made before, which is even when you have a lot of data, if the effect is very small, then that's not a reliable indicator of change. So this is the kind of thing where we would actually sit down with that program leader and just talk about how to get those scores improved. And if I look at this, for example, one neat thing I can do with Power BI is I can actually take this view and I can export it as a PDF. And then in our case as a foundation, what we would do is the program officer can then take this report and go talk to that nonprofit or that agency partner and say, can you help us figure out how to get these scores up, because we really want to see us having a better effect on the community. And we don't use this punitively, but we use it as an important data point to have an objective view of performance over time. So I hope that was helpful and interesting. I covered a lot of ground. And with that, I'm actually going to stop my share and pass the baton back to Neetu. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, everyone. I'm Neetu, and I'm the Digital Marketing Analyst at TechSoup. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about Power BI and how to create simple visualizations using Power BI. So I've been using Power BI to analyze and visualize data for a while now, and it is such a powerful tool to create simple visualizations with just a drag and drop. You can connect to different data sources using Power BI. So be it files that are Excel or CSV, or folders, or content packs such as data from Google Analytics, or even databases, Power BI lets you connect to them all. To those who are familiar with Tableau, Power BI is very similar to Tableau. Once you have built your dashboard using Power BI, you can publish your dashboards using a Power BI Pro license and choose who to share it with. Users with access to these shared dashboards can view them using their desktop and also their mobile devices, such as iPhones, iPads, Android phones, Windows 10 devices, and similar handheld devices. And currently, security is one of the most important topics, and Power BI lets you set granular security while sharing your data. You can choose who you want to share your dashboard with, whether it is within your organization or people outside your organization. And Power BI also lets you set security levels in a way that it will disable people who you shared these reports or dashboard with from sharing them again. So in short, basically you can be as specific as you want to be while sharing your Power BI dashboard. Once your dashboard is shared, if your data is connected to dynamic sources, say Google Sheets or Google Analytics or SQL Server, you can schedule auto refreshes, which will refresh the data periodically. So once you build your dashboard, you can simply share the dashboard and have Power BI do the schedule refreshes for you. If you're looking to build dashboards, you can get started by downloading the Power BI desktop. This is free of cost and can be downloaded from the link mentioned in this PowerPoint. And I'll ask my colleague Seema to send this out in the chat box as well. You will, however, need to sign up for a Power BI account to utilize the free desktop version. However, this is very straightforward and requires only some basic information. You will need to be aware, however, that the email you use to sign up for the Power BI desktop version has to be a business email address. So emails such as gmail.com or yahoo.com will not work during the sign-up process. Emails like .gov are also not accepted, but .edu and .org are. However, Power BI cannot screen out all non-commercial addresses, so you might be able to get away with some email addresses. So the free version I talked about earlier was for building dashboards. Once you have built your dashboards and you want to share your dashboards, you will need the Power BI Pro license. You can get this nonprofit pricing for a Power BI Pro license through TechSoup for $3 per month for one license. I believe currently the cost of a commercial Power BI license is around $10 or so. Okay, so now we have talked about the Power BI and Power BI licensing options. Let's head to a short basic demo. Let me go ahead and share my screen and show you how simple it is to create basic visualizations with just a drag and drop. So let me share my screen here. Okay, please let me know if you can see my screen. Perfect. Okay, so this is how Power BI Desktop looks like. On the left-hand side pane, you can see 3 boxes over here. You can see my cursor moving over here. The report view, this is where you will create your actual visualizations. Then you have the data view. This is where your data from Excel or other files come from. And this is usually stored as a table with rows and columns. And then there's a model view, which is used to create relationship between various tables. You can begin to create a dashboard by loading data from one of your data sources into the desktop model by clicking on the Get Data button over here. As you can see, there are so many different sources, and the top most common sources are listed over here. So I have already loaded my data into this dashboard, and I can see it in the data view over here. So when I click the data view, you can see the table with several rows and columns over here. So let me go back to my report view. And now on the right-hand side, you can see the visualization pane, where there are different visualizations available in Power BI Desktop. You'll find the most basic visualizations here, such as a bar chart, pie chart, waterfall chart, tables, etc. On the further right, you can see the fields pane. This is where the data you loaded from your Excel comes in, with all the headers or the column names of your data. All these are stored here, and you can pick which column to drag and drop to create your visualization. Okay, so now let's start by creating a basic dashboard. So as you can see, this is a very simple columns over here. So if I want to see the units sold for each country, I simply can click on the units sold over here. What it will do is prompt a visualization on its own. So as you can see, this is the total number of units sold by different countries, and it's a total amount over here. To see a visual for each country, now let me drag the country column from here into the axis field. And then you can see how this dashboard or this visualization is split for each country. Now say I want to make it more specific and see how the countries have done for the units sold per year. So let me pull the year and move it to the legend column over here. And you can see it's split by the years. So in 2013 doesn't look like a great year for any of the countries over here, versus 2014, the units sold are much higher. So now your very first basic simple graph has been created. So now let's see if we can slice and dice your data to get more insights using a slicer visualization. So this is a slicer over here. So let's go ahead and click a slicer. And then you can say, let's create the slicer for the different countries. So drag the country into the field. And then you can see the different countries pop up over here. Now when you click on each of the country, your data in the bar chart should reflect it appropriately. So this is very dynamic in this way. This is why Power BI is so powerful. With just a few clicks, you will get such a dynamic dashboard. In order to remove this selection, you can click on Clear Selections over here. Now let's add some more data visualization to the dashboard. Let's see the profits that are made by each of the products that are sold over the years. So let's grab the bar chart again over here. Let me move it to the bottom. Okay, so now the value you want to see here is the profit of the products. So drag and drop the profit from here to the value section because you want to see the profits, value of the profits. And now let's drag the product to the legend section so you can see how these profits are doing for these particular products. Now say you want to see this by the different dates. Now let's drag the date column and drop it to the axis. And see, you can see that 2013 has been populated and 2014. This is pretty old data, so that's why the years are showing as 2013 and 14. Now, what you can see is that the data over here is clustered to 2013 and 14. One great thing about Power BI is that you can do this drill down option. So when I click on this drill down option, it can show you different quarters for those years. And you can be more granular and drill down to each of the months. So let me go ahead and do it to the quarter-wise. So you can see how each of these products are performing. Let's go ahead and add another slicer over here for products, just like we did for the country. So let's add a slicer for the product. Similarly, just same way, you drag the products into the field. And then here you go. You can see different products come up over here. Now if you click on each of these selections, you can see how the data for both the units sold by country and year and the profit by year is changing dynamically. Look at that. So it's changing dynamically. Let me clear the selection. Now, for example, if you want to be super specific and see how this product criteria has been doing for France, you can click on France first and then this product. And then you can see how this particular product has been doing in France. And you can see Q3 was not a particularly great year. It had a negative value over here. And then if you want to clear your selection, you can go ahead and clear your selection this way. All right. So this is in short how you can build great insights from your dashboard in a dynamic way with just a few clicks. Once your dashboard is built and you're ready, you can publish it to your Power BI service. If you have a Pro license, which I mentioned about earlier, the Pro license will be $3 per user per month. And once you have the Power BI Pro license, you can simply click on this Publish button at the top, and then your dashboard will be published. The dashboards which are published and shared will have the exactly the same dynamic properties the way you build it. So that means that your end users can click through these dynamic dashboards to derive insights on their own. And with that, I'm at the end of my demo, and I'll stop my screen share and pass the control back to Seema. Thank you for staying with me through the process.
All right. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Neetu, for today's presentation. And I just want to let you guys know the TechSoup Impact Data team is offering 3 free half-day consultations and a dashboard prototype session for registered nonprofits. If you guys are interested, you can send an email to Mike, which is myeaton@techsoup.org, and I'll send this in the chat also. And then if you want to tell him about any challenges that you're having and include any sample spreadsheets or CSV files, then the data team will take a look at that and decide who they can help in those 3 sessions. And you do not need a Power BI license to participate, but you should have the free desktop version installed. And then please don't include any private or sensitive data. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and move over to the Q&A. So we had a few questions that came in during the presentation. So Mike, if you don't mind answering this question, one of the questions that we had is, if you're kind of just starting out, what are some good data points to kind of keep in mind if you want to measure impact for your nonprofit?
Well, I think it starts by just having a good idea of what your intended outcome is, and then just looking around and seeing, like we did, what are simple ways to get at that don't require so much data or so much intrusiveness. It can get hard to offer a general response, but I think the principle is start with the complexity of what the real complex real-world problems you're trying to change, and then try to search out measures that are representative of that change but are easier to collect and things you could collect over time. And if that's by the way, I'll just say one thing. If that's the topic of interest, we'd be happy to tackle that in one of these free sessions we're going to offer.
Okay, perfect. And then Neetu, we had a question earlier about the free licenses. Do you mind just quickly going over what's available for Power BI?
Sure, Seema. So currently, when you are dashboarding, you can just get away with the free Power BI desktop application. You can simply download it using that link which Seema sent out. And however, if you say once you've created your dashboard and you want to share it with your colleagues on the dashboard, with the dashboards, you, however, would need the Power BI Pro license. And TechSoup does offer this license at $3 per user per month. You simply have to go to TechSoup.org and look for Power BI. In order to get these Power BI licenses, however, through TechSoup for that nonprofit pricing, your organization will need to be a qualified nonprofit. And it should be eligible for those Microsoft products. You know how there are some Microsoft restrictions for some of our organizations. So once you're qualified through TechSoup and you have the appropriate qualifications, you should be able to get that Power BI Pro license at that reduced cost of $3 per license.
Okay, perfect. And then in terms of getting, I guess, just any basic statistics, data training, or just data gathering, do you guys have any resources that you guys recommend for people who are just starting out?
Yeah, I think I'll tackle that because these guys have both done it the old-fashioned way of going to college and studying it. But I actually got what I felt was a very good grounding in data analysis and visualization through Coursera. And if you go into the Coursera, and there are other, of course, online services as well, but I did a 6-month program online. It was like 10 hours a week, and it really kind of turbo boosted my ability to think about evaluation in new ways. So I'll paste a link to that course that I did, but I would encourage you guys to look around for resources like that, and they're very inexpensive. Also, in response to one question I saw in here, we've been kicking around the idea of doing this as a online course as well, so that we would have a lot of the content probably spread out a little bit more, and then also, but include in that like some workshopping and let people sort of work through the process of creating your own measures and analysis. So if that seems of interest, then let us know if that sounds good to you too. And I'll paste in that Coursera link right now.
All right. We had a great question that just came in from Aaron. Who within a nonprofit organization have you found is the best to manage data collection, analysis, and or visualization? And I know a lot of our nonprofits are pretty small, 5 or less people, so if they don't have a data scientist on hand, I guess who would be the next best person to do that? And I think that question, Mike, if you don't mind answering.
Yeah, sure. So I'll say that, you know, I'm the kind of resident geek in my foundation, so I do the thinking about but I do more than that because I really try to step into what the outcomes are about and how the programs even are designed. I partner, though, with very non-technical, non-sophisticated program officers, and they actually manage all the data collection pieces. So I think anybody really can collect data. In fact, as long as the data is not sensitive, you can even just set up a Google form and collect your data that way. So there's lots of really good and powerful ways today, or SurveyMonkey, or many other ways you can collect the data. So that part of it is actually pretty easy, and it's pretty easy to generate those intake methods too. But I think the one thing I would say, especially at setup, and this is definitely what we find, at setup you definitely need someone who has at least a working knowledge of statistics and data, a little bit about data knowledge, and kind of an Excel whiz or somebody like that to really set up your model one time. But once it's set up, like Neetu was talking about, the great thing with Power BI and why we're finding this so powerful is once the model is set up and the dashboard's created, anybody in the field can basically just keep collecting data, and those dashboards and those reports get automatically updated, which is incredibly powerful and transformative.
All right. So we have one more question here from Amy. So she's asking, it seems that the key to a successful proxy measure is the link to the underlying research that connects the proxy measure to the intended outcome. Mike, do you have any tips for finding good research to make those connections?
I'm just so delighted because obviously you were paying attention. It's exactly the case. You know, I know more about it for health than I do for other areas, but I believe that these kinds of measures exist everywhere. There are even, you know, there's something called the 100 Million Healthier Lives, which I would recommend. as a source. I think that increasingly we're looking towards these kind of bigger, broader indicators. And again, the great thing is try to find one. Even there's free ones as well, but try to find ones that have a good research connection to what you're trying to measure ultimately. But it's hard to give, again, a broad answer, but I thank you for the exactly precisely the right question.
All right. Okay, so it looks like we are getting close to time. So I'm going to go ahead and close out today's webinar. Thank you again to Mike. Thank you again to Neetu and to Katya for today's presentation. If you guys don't mind, it's always really helpful for us to get your feedback in our post-event survey. So any feedback that you have, please feel free to take a minute or two to answer that. It really helps us dictate future content. If you're on social media, feel free to give us a follow. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we also have a blog at blog.techsoup.org. And we have a few more webinars coming up in June, so if you guys are interested in any of these topics, you can find that at our website, TechSoup.org, and you can register there. We also, as Mike mentioned earlier, we have TechSoup courses. We don't currently have the Power BI one yet, but we will take that into consideration after today's webinar. But we do have topics around Google Analytics, Facebook advertising, design, tech training. We also have TechSoup services, which includes help desk, managed IT, cloud implementation, and then also Office 365 support. If you guys are interested in taking a course, so we do offer a 10% discount for our webinar attendees using the code that you see here, and we'll email that out to you in the follow-up email. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thanks again to everyone who attended. And then again, if you want to sign up for the 3 free slots, we'll send out Mike's email in the follow-up email. And I think that's it for today. Thank you all.